As Imperceptibly as Grief was probably written sometime in the mid-1860s, when the American poet Emily Dickinson was in her mid-30s. It's impossible to pin it down any more accurately than that, as Dickinson, who lived an isolated and reclusive existence, only published 10 poems during her lifetime, a mere fraction of the nearly 1,800 that she actually wrote. Publication did not happen until 1890, 4 years after her death at the age of 55, when her younger sister, Lavinia, discovered a collection of her work, although the poems which appeared in print were heavily edited in line with the poetic tastes and conventions of the time, to remove her idiosyncratic punctuation and capitalization of nouns, and references to individuals. It was not until 1955 that a collection, The Poems of Emily Dickinson, was published which, by and large, respected her original intentions. As Imperceptibly as Grief is elegiac in tone, an elegy is a poem of serious reflection expressing sorrow for someone who has died. In the poem, Dickinson uses the language of her experience of the way in which the sharp pain of grief mellows into calm acceptance and resignation without you realizing it until it has happened, to describe her perception of the departure of summer. The poem consists of 4 quatrains, which are sometimes set out as 4 four-line stanzas and sometimes as one block of 16 lines, in which Dickinson employs an A-B-C-B rhyme scheme, where the B rhyme is, in 3 cases out of the 4, a slant rhyme. This almost but not quite rhyme gives the poem a slightly off or disharmonious feel, and is perhaps a reflection of the poet's own general feeling of malaise or uneasiness. It's also written in common or hymn metre, where the first and third lines consist of iambic tetrameter with 4 iambic feet, didum, 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 didum. And the second and fourth lines consist of iambic trimeter with 3 iambic feet, didum, didum, didum. This effectively divides each stanza into 2 pairs of 2 lines, the missing foot in the second line of each causing the reader to stop briefly, as this is usually, although not always, at the end of a single thought. The poem features Dickinson's customary punctuation of dashes rather than full stops. These dashes serve a number of functions. Not only do they separate her thoughts so that they are self-contained, demanding that the reader pause momentarily for reflection, but they also, due to their not having the finality of a full stop, suggests the interconnectedness of these thoughts as they follow on from one another. Many of the nouns are capitalized, effectively turning them into proper nouns, thus suggesting personification in some cases. Not only does this lift Dickinson's preoccupations from the personal to the universal, but also suggests both the belief in and an acceptance of powers that are beyond our control. Words, including those relating to seasons and periods of the day, form a semantic field of time, e.g. summer, lapsed away, twilight, spending, afternoon, dusk, and morning. It's a poem of contrasts where Dickinson not only employs oxymoron, e.g. harrowing grace, but also juxtaposes positive with negative language, e.g. courteous yet harrowing, and allusions to dark with allusions to light, e.g. dusk and morning. It's also one of paradox, where it seems the further away from the grief caused by the death of loved ones you travel, the closer you come to your own demise. In order to travel away from death, you need to travel towards it. It's also a poem with unexpected relationships between ideas, i.e. summer, which is usually seen as a time of warmth, abundance and positivity, is equated to the sharp pain of grief. Perhaps for Dickinson, the brightness and predominance of the light at this time of year is similar to the clarity with which one feels an abundance of grief. And the fading away of the light in autumn equates to the dulling or fading away of this pain. Relationships between ideas are also uneasy, where we come to realise that segmenting time into periods with defined start and end points, such as summer and implicitly autumn, morning and dusk, are man-made constructs which bear no relationship to our own seamless experience of time and nature as we live it. All of these features suggest Dickinson's own ambivalence or mixed feelings about her subject matter. The poem begins, as imperceptibly as grief the summer lapsed away. The adverb imperceptibly means that something happens so gradually that it cannot be perceived or observed. The phrasal verb lapsed away means to pass gradually or to expire because necessary conditions have not been maintained, perhaps either through ignorance or lack of oversight. Dickinson's simile here is interesting in several ways and allows us to infer quite a bit about her. First, however, we need to understand a bit more about how similes are structured. Similes and metaphors have a three-part interrelated structure, two parts of which are on the page, while the third may be on the page but may also happen in our heads, varying from person to person based upon our different experiences. The writer has something that they want to describe, the tenor. In Dickinson's case, this is summer. He or she chooses something, the vehicle. In Dickinson's case, this is grief, which has one or more features or attributes, the ground, that they wish to lend to the tenor. In Dickinson's case, this is the way in which the sharp pain of grief evolves and mellows so gradually that you don't notice it happening. And it usually follows the structure, the tenor is like the vehicle, or the tenor, verb, as X, as the vehicle. In the case of this poem, the simile takes the latter structure. Summer lapses away as, imperceptibly, as grief. Here we can immediately see that Dickinson inverts the structure of her simile, with the vehicle, grief, presented in the first line in a fronted adverbial, while the tenor, the summer, follows in the second line. This immediately gives the idea of grief prominence, as it is the first idea with which the reader engages. Not only that, usually the vehicle gives the reader insight into a writer's perception or understanding of the tenor. What is interesting about this simile is that the poem seems to have as much to say, if not more, about Dickinson's perception of the vehicle, or grief, as well as her perception of the passing of time. If we look at her biography, we can see that she lived in a house overlooking a grim and forbidding graveyard and was familiar with bereavement and its ensuing grief from a young age, as her second cousin and close friend, Sophia Holland, died from typhus when Emily was just 14. She was deeply affected by this event, writing 2 years later that "It seemed to me I should die too if I could not be permitted to watch over her or even look at her face." So it's unsurprising that she sees the world through the lens of death and grief. If we return to the idea that summer has lapsed away, she is quick, however, to stress that she does not blame it, saying that it was too imperceptible at last to seem like perfidy. The word perfidy is an archaic word for betrayal or treachery. Its leaving then was so imperceptible, Note the use of polyptoton here, which emphasises its gradual nature, that there has been no intentional betrayal. In the same way, she implicitly argues that her grief has lapsed away or changed so gradually and subtly over time that she is not betraying those that she has loved and lost. The second stanza appears to expand on her premise in the first stanza, that it has happened so gradually that neither the passing of summer nor the passing of grief can be called treacherous. It is instead a time of peace and reflection, of a quietness distilled. In literal terms, distillation is a process whereby a liquid is purified or its essence extracted. Metaphorically, Dickinson appears to mean that this is a time of pure and concentrated calmness, even if this is overshadowed by encroaching darkness, as she continues, as twilight long begun. Twilight refers to the time of day when the sun is below the horizon, during both the morning and the evening, although it usually refers to the evening, especially when used metaphorically. I.e., when you are in your twilight years, these are the last years of your life. The fact that it is long begun might be an allusion to her having lived in the shadow of death for most of her life. The prefix twi means both double and half, and suggests that this is a paradoxical time of day, which is neither dark nor light, but is also simultaneously both. Twilight is also a time of day when colour is difficult to perceive, and perhaps also highlights the imperceptible nature of her experience of time passing. Once more we sense Dickinson's ambivalence or mixed feelings here. In the second half of the stanza, she personifies nature as a lady with only herself for company spending a sequestered afternoon. The adjective sequestered means isolated or hidden away, and perhaps evokes the way in which nature starts to shut down or appears to hide away during the colder months. This, however, does not necessarily have the negative connotations one would expect. Dickinson could almost be talking about herself here, as she willingly spent much of her life physically alone, keeping up a written correspondence with a number of people. And it is said that in her later years she was reluctant even to leave her bedroom. There is a sense perhaps that this isolation is a source of peace where she is able to be at one with her own thoughts. The first line of the third stanza refers to the shortening of the days. The dusk drew earlier in. Note the alliteration of the heavy d sound in dusk drew, and the initial vowel sounds of earlier in. This line is also catalectic, or a syllable short, with 7 rather than 8, perhaps to mimic the way in which the day is cut short, and also has a disrupted rhythm. The dusk drew earlier in, with 2 initial iambic feet, didum, didum, followed by an anapaest, dididum. This first line also ends with an uncustomary dash, forcing the reader to pause. All of these features combine to produce a subtle dissonance which creates a sense of unease. In the second line, the morning foreign shone. The word foreign here has the meaning of being strange and unfamiliar, and perhaps refers to the way in which sunrise comes later, and so light, which is implied in the word shone, has become a stranger to it. Note the anastrophe here with the inversion of the words foreign and shone, which also adds to the sense of disharmony in these lines. Dickinson uses the second half of this stanza to expand on the image in the second line. Morning is a courteous yet harrowing grace, as guest that would be gone. The adjective courteous means polite, while the adjective harrowing means acutely distressing. grace can have a number of meanings, but it is likely that in this context she means the free and unmerited favour given us by God. The oxymoronic, harrowing grace, with the juxtaposition of the negative with the positive, suggests once more that Dickinson has an uneasy and ambivalent relationship with both the passing of grief and the passing of time, which is further consolidated by the final line of the stanza. The verb would be is an archaic way of saying wants or desires to be. Here she imagines mourning as a guest who is polite. She does not want to overstay her welcome, even if this means her departure is simultaneously acutely distressing. If we take a closer look, while the first line has 7 rather than 8 syllables, we can see that the third line has 9 rather than 8, otherwise known as being hypercatalectic. A courteous yet harrowing grace. The line begins with 3 iambs, didum, 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 as we would expect, but ends with an anapaest, dididum. This movement away from the regular iambic rhythm gives this stanza, with its internal disharmony, a rather disjointed feel, although of course it still has an overall 28-syllable rhythm, thus simultaneously maintaining overall harmony. The fourth stanza opens with, and thus without a wing or service of a keel. The phrase and thus communicating that she is coming to a conclusion. A wing clearly refers to those which we find on a bird, while a keel is the ridge along the breastbone of a bird to which the flight muscles are attached. And so, without the physical means to fly possessed by birds, our summer made her light escape into the beautiful. The use of the possessive pronoun our is interesting, as Dickinson perhaps hints here that this is a fate which awaits us all. The use of the adjective light here to describe the way in which summer escapes once more alludes to the way in which she has disappeared without being noticed into the ether, or the beautiful, which is perhaps also an allusion to heaven or the afterlife. For Emily Dickinson, it seems that time flies as it leads us softly, yet inexorably, to our own demise, where a period of encroaching darkness is ultimately followed by paradise. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions, please let me know in the comments section below, and I'll do my best to answer them. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel for more videos on English language topics and exam techniques and English literature texts.